All right. It doesn't get any bigger than this. I've got an impossible task ahead of me. Bear with me. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but for this episode, I am tackling the story of one of my top 3 bands of all time, with over 250 million albums sold and a catalog of studio albums spanning nearly 5 decades, some of the greatest albums ever. But their acclaim isn't counted in albums made or sold. It's all about the music, truly. Songs that have captivated generation after generation. And to do it in the way they have, it truly is the greatest rock and roll story ever told, this band. Light and dark, genius and insanity, high stakes drama, hostile takeovers, decades-long feuds, bitter firings, near breakups, and then one of the worst breakups ever. But mixed within the madness, some of the greatest albums ever put to vinyl. Just straight up. How can so much dysfunction breed so much brilliance? Well, we're going to count it down and find out next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time, especially today. You know, if you used to tune into The Simpsons, especially to see the always changing couch gag, kind of like we do here, you'll dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now, click the red button and click the bell so you know when our stuff comes out. Also, you can check us out on Patreon, and we have some new merch coming. Check that out below. That helps us keep it a daily channel. So I tell you what, this is an impossible task, but it's time for another episode of our series, Evolution. This is a show where we tell the story of a band's career through 5 defining tracks, except for today. That's because the story of today's band can't be told in 5 tracks. Honestly, I don't know if you could tell it in 10. They're just not a singles band. This is a band that can only be appreciated by listening to their full album in order, track order. So if you haven't guessed it, today's band is Pink Floyd. And with a catalog of 15 studio albums spanning nearly 50 years, it feels like an impossible task. So after thinking about how am I going to do this, I decided to tell Pink Floyd's story in 5 defining albums instead of songs. Although I still feel like I'm shortchanging this band even doing just 5 albums, but I'm going to give it a go. Along the way, I'm going to spotlight a key track from each record that's most vital to its theme. So just as a way of introduction before we get into my Evolution album picks, let's talk band origins for a minute. We haven't really covered this much with Pink Floyd. They came together in London in 1965, coalescing around 4 musicians: singer, guitarist Syd Barrett, bassist Roger Waters, keyboardist Richard Wright, and drummer Nick Mason. From 1965 to 1967, with Syd Barrett fronting the band, released a couple of non-album singles, Arnold Lane, and See Emily Play. As well as the album The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. The opening era of Floyd was, of course, heavily influenced by Syd Barrett's creativity, his imagination, and it was characterized by childlike whimsy with psychedelic experimentation. For example, from Piper at the Gates of Dawn, you had songs like, Bike. And Interstellar Overdrive. Barrett's indulgence in hallucinogenic substances served as the gateway into some of this inspiration, far out inspiration. However, in late 67 and early 68, Syd's behavior became increasingly erratic. Once friendly and extroverted, Syd Barrett began a harrowing descent into madness, becoming increasingly depressed, withdrawn, and near comatose on stage. Inspired by hallucinations, memory loss, incoherent speech, and mood swings, Syd was really quickly becoming a shell of his former self. Concerned for their friend and the band's future, Syd's bandmates added a guy named Dave Gilmour to the lineup as a second guitarist. And actually, for a few shows, Gilmour played and sang while Syd Barrett kind of wandered around on stage. Growing tired of Barrett's behavior, the band decided to follow the path of Brian Wilson, relegating him to the studio to let his genius flow. That didn't really work either, though. Syd was too far gone by this point, so the band officially parted ways with Barrett on April 6, 1968. So now, missing their principal songwriter, Pink Floyd finished their second LP, Saucerful of Secrets. One Barrett track would make the album, Jug Band Blues, just one. But from here on out, Sid's only contribution to the band would be really his haunted memory. A film soundtrack more followed in June of '69, and then Umaguma later that year in November. That was their first platinum seller, and by this point, Pink Floyd were building a substantial cult following. Their first album of the '70s, Atom Heart Mother, was also their first UK number one. 1971's Metal would go double platinum and hit number 3 on the British charts, and that one contained classics like One of These Days and the epic Echoes. 1972's Obscured by Clouds was a slight commercial step back, going to number 6 in the UK and only achieving gold status here in the States. But all bets were off when it became time for 1973. The 8th studio album, The Dark Side of the Moon, which of course has to be my first Evolution album pick. Pink Floyd's landmark record, The Dark Side of the Moon, is unquestionably the elite of rock and roll, one of the most revered records ever. And every detail on Dark Side is stunningly effectual. Beginning with the title itself, a metaphor for madness. If you trace the origins of the word lunatic, you find that luna means moon in Latin, and lunaticus means moonstruck. In some ancient cultures, it was a common belief that insanity was affected by changing cycles of the moon. And speaking from experience, Pink Floyd captures this idea perfectly. Really, each of the tracks in some way is tied to the overreaching theme of insanity in the modern world. Offerings range from Money, one of the greatest classic rock tracks ever, Money in all of its filthy greed and glory. And then there's the tragic violence of Us and Them. And then there's the haunting insanity of Brain Damage. Is in my head. When Syd Barrett descended into madness, Roger Waters was the one who stepped up and took over songwriting duties. And Dark Side of the Moon is Waters coming into his own as a lyricist and as a conceptual artist. Recorded at London's Abbey Road Studios, Dark Side took more than 8 months to produce. Of course, assisting in the creation of this legendary 10-track collection was an up-and-coming musical genius, brilliant young engineer named Alan Parsons. Alan had previously assisted on the Beatles' LP Abbey Road, and he'd go on to have a phenomenal career of his own, of course. So for The Dark Side of the Moon, for the spotlight on this one, I gotta go with Time. Which, in my opinion, is one of the most stirring songs in the rock catalog. That's really saying something. I know, but thematically, Time laments the wasting life's most valuable commodity. Kind you'll someday wish you had back, but you never will. Taking away the moments that make up the dull day. The 7-minute epic, it's packed with profound lyrics and imagery about lost opportunities and our ever-approaching expiration date. So brilliant. It opens with a 2+ minute intro, kicking off with an exploding sonic collage of ringing alarms, chimes, and bells. The sequence and effect serves as a wake-up call, bringing you to full attention to the magnitude of the track that you're about to experience. Now, the aforementioned Alan Parsons masterminded this sequence. I think it's brilliant. Dark Side of the Moon was released on March 23rd, 1973. It made a massive jump on the Billboard charts here in America. Previously, Pink Floyd's highest charting LP in the US was Obscured by Clouds. That peaked at number 46. Dark Side of the Moon shot that out of the water. It went all the way to number 1, where it stayed for over 800 non-consecutive weeks. In the UK, the album reached number 2. Crazy. And thanks to Pink Floyd devotees around the world, it's become one of the biggest selling records ever with 50 million copies. Rumors that there was just one factory that all they did was make The Dark Side of the Moon forever, for years. Pardon the interruption, but I gotta quickly tell you about our new nationally syndicated radio show, Classic Rock You with the Professor. This launching in a bunch of major markets this weekend. Really excited about it. Finally, I get to play the full songs with bite-sized stories of these classics told by the legends alongside the tracks. I know you're going to dig it. Check it out early Saturday morning starting at 6 a.m. Central or Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Central. Just click on the link right up here or the link below in the description to listen on WDRV The Drive in Chicago. Classic rock you, I'm telling you, it's a can't miss. Okay, so going into 1974, Pink Floyd was faced with what seemed like an impossible task. Following up The Dark Side of the Moon, after its phenomenal success, a lot of people might think that four members of Pink Floyd had their artistic direction set. They knew what they were doing. That wasn't the case at all. In fact, creating their next album, Wish You Were Here, it's actually my next Evolution pick, it would be a massive challenge. At one point, the band decided to abandon their instruments and record an album using household objects. Pots and pans and rubber bands and pencils, aerosol cans, wine glasses, and you thought that Dark Side of the Moon was insane. I mean, can you imagine? The band never did manage to produce a completed song from this, although some of the fragments they created didn't go to waste. For example, sounds from the track Wine Glasses were later used for the intro of Shine On You Crazy Diamond. But they didn't really get anywhere with this approach. Pink Floyd was literally grasping at straws, and I think they used straws in that actual album. But for all their misguided efforts, the band was feeling uninspired. By the end of '74, with the writing process growing stagnant, pressure on, Pink Floyd was on the verge of actually breaking up. Further compounding the problem was Roger Waters' growing ego. After instigating the creation of The Dark Side of the Moon, it had become increasingly clear to Roger that he needed to be in charge of everything. So Waters began to press his ascendancy over his colleagues, This further strained the band, and by this point, everyone was just kind of going through the motions. Said Waters, and I quote, "Finding ourselves shut up in Abbey Road Studios, 3 felt like a real constraint. Most of us didn't wish we were there at all. We wished we were somewhere else. I wasn't happy being there because I got the feeling we weren't together." End of quote. Yet the realization was the album's saving grace. Waters reframed his approach and decided to build the concept album around the band's stupor. Weaving in themes of alienation, fragmentation, and absence, Waters also reflected on the loss of their phantom fifth member, Syd Barrett. Torn up by the guilt of Syd's forced departure, Roger used this album as kind of a therapy, exposing his sorrow over Barrett's ouster. Hence the name Wish You Were Here. Once again at London's Abbey Road Studios, Wish You Were Here included the 9-part epic Shine On You Crazy Diamond, also Welcome to the Machine, Have a Cigar, and today's spotlight track, Wish You Were Here, the title track. The heart of the LP is, without a question, Wish You Were Here, one of Floyd's best. For the song, Waters dredged up the guilt that he felt over exiling Syd Barrett. He said, how I wish you were here. We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl year after year.
We're just two lost souls swimming in a fishbowl.
Now, notably, Wish You Were Here is also one of the only songs that the two principal songwriters in this legendary group, Roger Waters and David Gilmour, truly collaborated on. A lot of people don't know that. The Beatles were the same way. Now, released on September 12, 1975, a lot of critics, along with David Gilmour, argued that Wish You Were Here was Floyd's best album. I don't know that I would argue that it's not their best, but Wish You Were Here, it's phenomenal.
So you think you could tell?
Fittingly, the album would go #1 around the world. This is when they went global. Australia, New Zealand, Italy, Spain, France, the Netherlands, United Kingdom, and the United States, all #1 there. The album would also be 6 times platinum in the US and would sell over 23 million copies worldwide. So now, my third Pink Floyd Evolution album is Animals. Another concept album, probably more than any of them. Animals examine society through the lens of 3 types of animals: pigs, dogs, and sheep. Each representing a separate social class. Loosely based on George Orwell's grim political fable Animal Farm, 3 species are locked into a violent cycle of oppression and revolution. Sound familiar? The pigs are the despotic ruling class. Motivated by greed and power, they impose their worldview on the other animals. The dogs, savage and predatory, symbolize the social climbing middle class, climbing their way into positions of power. They do whatever it takes to get ahead. Finally, there are the sheep, this countless body of unquestioning masses. This is representing the common man. And they're exploited by the cunning of the dogs and the pigs. It's a bleak view of humanity for sure, one that's pretty right on the money, one that Waters called a cartoon sketch of how he saw the way society was organized. The track listing begins with Pigs on the Wing Part 1 and Dogs on Side 1, and Side 2 contains 3 more songs, Pigs, 3 different ones, Sheep, and Pigs on the Wings Part 2.
You know that I care.
Of those, I'm going to spotlight Dogs, the longest song on the album.
You got to be crazy.
Dogs is a formidable, darkly beautiful song. I know it's on the nose, but this is a dog-eat-dog track. It's all about having that killer instinct. It's cutthroat, backstabbing, it's bone-chilling.
Got to strike when the moment is right without thinking.
But at the same time, it's 17 plus minutes of pure sonic and psychological excellence. I mean, David Gilmour's solo guitar work alone is worth the price of the record. And his presence on this track is awe-inspired. Dogs also contains David's only lead vocal on the album, which is a waste. Juxtaposed with his guitar playing offers a stunning counterpoint to Rogers' inhuman lyrics.
By the people that you lied to.
The track actually started out as a composition considered for Wish You Were Here. At that point it was called You Gotta Be Crazy. Its lyrics describe the playbook of a heartless businessman. However, it didn't fit into the concept of Wish You Were Here, so it got the axe, but it is perfect here. The Animals was released on January 21st, 1977, reached number 3 in the US, number 2 in the UK, and number 1 in France, Germany, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Spain, and Portugal.
Try and shake off this creeping malaise.
Here in the States, it has sold over 4 million records. Pretty low by Pink Floyd standards, but still impressive, especially for an album that didn't really release any singles. It's all about the album, thematically. My 4th Evolution pick, I've got to go with The Wall. I know, it's an easy one. They're all 70s LPs I'm choosing here, but I don't see how I can leave any of these out. The real problem is figuring out what else to include after that. I'll get to that in a few minutes, though. The Wall is arguably the most ambitious and iconic concept album ever created. Like Wish You Were Here, it was written while Pink Floyd was falling apart at the seams. The Wall's genesis began when a stadium-sized concert went sideways. Feeling disconnected from the audience, Waters lashed out at a fan he believed was trying to incite a riot. Beckoning this fan to the front of the stage, Waters actually spit in his face. We covered that about a year ago. Appalled by his actions, Waters spent a lot of time thinking about the drawbacks of fame. And he started to visualize a physical wall between himself and his audience. Waters then refined his metaphor, making it autobiographical, as well as absorbing key events from the life of Syd Barrett. The Wall chronicles the trials and travails of the semi-fictional Pink from his childhood in post-war England to his later self-imposed exile as an adult. From the beginning, Pink's existence, it's a mess. Entering the world, he's immediately robbed of his father, who dies in combat, leaving him alone in the case of a suffocating mother. As a boy, he becomes a cog in an educational machine hell-bent on creating compliant students. Scarred from life's unrelenting adversity, Pink, like Roger Waters, constructs a psychological wall separating himself from the world. There, cut off from human interaction, he can be shielded from life's emotional onslaught. Every incident that causes Pink pain is all in all just another brick in the wall, as it says in the song. Now, as Pink graduates from oppressed childhood to adulthood, he takes on the mantle of a disillusioned rock star. In time, Pink suffers a full-on mental breakdown, coming face to face with his demons in the album's penultimate track, The Trial.
Showing feelings of an almost human nature.
Here is where Pink attempts to bring himself to justice. As judge, jury, and prosecution, Pink re-examines the criminality of his life, calling the narrative's primary characters as witness. When the verdict is delivered, Pink is found guilty and is sentenced to tear down the wall, exposing himself to the world. For the Wall's spotlight track, of course I gotta go with Comfortably Numb. Maybe the greatest song in the canon of classic rock. I mean, certainly side by side with Stairway or Sweet Home Alabama. For me, this one song stands above everything else in Pink Floyd's catalog. It is the GOAT. It's goated, as my son says. Roger Waters wrote the lyrics about being detached from reality. Actually, in a 1980 radio interview, Waters said part of the song is about when he got hepatitis. He didn't realize it. Before a show one night in Philadelphia, a doctor gave Roger a sedative to help with the pain, thinking that it was a stomach disorder. From there, things got really screwed up. During the show, Roger's hands were numb like two toy balloons, which is where the lyrics came from. Unable to focus, he realized the fans didn't really care. They were just too busy screaming. So in that moment, Roger was comfortably numb. But really, it's the juxtaposition of the two voices, right? Waters and Gilmour. This is what makes the track legendary.
Okay. Just a little pinprick.
Truly, the dark and the light. When it goes from Waters' dark mutterings like, "Hello, is there anybody in there?" and you may feel a little sick.
But you may feel a little sick.
And then to Gilmour, his rising chorus, it takes you from the darkest abyss to the literal heavens when he says, "There is no pain, you are receding. A distant ship, smoke on the horizon."
No pain, you are receding.
Truly, it's the greatest musical contrast that the ear can experience. And of course, the most breathtaking solo in any band's catalog. Followed by the greatest closing line of a rock song that I can think of. I don't think it can be topped. When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but it was gone. I cannot put my finger on it now. The child is grown, the dream is gone. I have become comfortably numb.
Become comfortably numb.
I mean, truly the greatest tragedy ever put to music. Guys, I'm telling you, nobody writes songs like these anymore. Stairway, Comfortably Numb, they're perfect songs. I mean, you don't hear songs with that kind of contrast in it that paint such a vivid picture of darkness. But then when you feel like you're gonna just sink down to the lowest level, there's that light, that beacon of light, which is David Gilmour. Oh, I love it. Now, The Wall was released on November 30th, 1979. Went to number 3 in the UK, which is kind of a head scratcher, but it went to number 1 in France, the US, Canada, the Netherlands, West Germany, Sweden, and Norway. Of course, commercial blockbuster. It sold over 33 million copies around the world, a number 1 hit for Pink Floyd. Still their second best seller behind Dark Side of the Moon. Only Pink Floyd can do that, or Zeppelin, or the Beatles. So the 80s were an even more turbulent decade for Pink Floyd, if you can believe that. Rick Wright was given the boot by Waters during the recording of The Wall, and then, 1983 brought the final cut, which is, to me, more of a Roger Waters solo album than anything.
I can barely define the shape of this moment in time.
He pretty much cut guitar genius David Gilmour altogether, which is crazy. I just don't understand it. Afterward, Waters and the rest of the band officially parted ways, all the while arguing over who had the rights to the name Pink Floyd. A David Gilmour-led version of the band then released a momentary lapse of reason in 1987 while a lawsuit was going on. Snipes and jabs were traded back and forth throughout the 80s, and we've covered a lot of that in previous episodes, so I'm going to jump ahead to my final Evolution pick. And my final, 1994's The Division Bell. I mean, guys, easily the most anticipated album of its time. It killed it during the grunge era when everything had changed. The Division Bell was released after a 6-year Pink Floyd absence. That's an eternity in rock and roll. This was the second record released by the band since they parted ways with Roger. And for many years, it would be Pink Floyd's closing statement, really, at least in terms of studio albums. Momentary Lapse of Reason and its ensuing tour was a smashing success. However, in the years that followed, Gilmour kept busy collaborating with other artists. There was Kate Bush, Paul McCartney, Dream Academy, and Elton John. It wasn't until January of '93 that the Gilmour-led Floyd began writing and recording new songs together. Work began at Britannia Road Studios, but the record would evolve throughout 1993 in various studios. The three band members originally chose 27 pieces from 60-plus ideas they'd created. They narrowed that down to 11. 5 tracks were composed by David Gilmour on his very own, 4 by Gilmour and Wright, and 1 by Gilmour and Bob Ezrin, and then 1 by Rick Wright alone. For the first time in a long time, though, Rick played a major role in the creative development of a Pink Floyd album. Long overdue. For my spotlight track, I gotta pay homage to High Hopes, one of my personal favorite Pink Floyd songs. Really, one of my personal favorite songs ever. It's just means so much to me. I mean, when you wait 6 years for an album to come out, I became a Floyd fan in my early 80s because my dad listened to their records. But 6 years to a young man, that's like 6 decades. And I have to admit, I waited to listen to Floyd's new stuff because it got released on the radio early until I could hear the songs within the concept of the album. It was hard for me to do, but I did it. When I played it in the car, opened that thing up, and I heard High Hopes. I got to that beautiful David Gilmour sung chorus. The grass was greener, the light was brighter, with friends surrounded, the nights of wonder.
The grass was greener.
I broke down. I've never had a song that brought so many emotions all at once. It's definitely been worth the wait. So many memories are tied to this record for me. And the fact that I was in my senior year of high school, I was at a crossroads of youth and adulthood, it was the perfect moment for this album to be the soundtrack of my life. Released on March 20th, 1994, The Division Bell hit #1 in 21 countries, and it was put out when the musical landscape had completely changed. I mean, grunge and hip-hop were ruling the airwaves. What band could come in and hit #1 and knock everybody's socks off? Pink Floyd.
The ringing of the division bell had begun.
So, I mean, this was a wonderful period to be a Floyd fan. You had Rick Wright as a full-time member again, Nick Mason on point. The band embarked on another lengthy tour playing both their old and new material. Although The Division Bell wasn't the end of Pink Floyd, it would be their last studio album until The Endless River. That one was released, of course, November 2014, if memory serves. Wright's passing in 2008, and Gilmour and Waters' eternal feuds seem to have all but ensured that Pink Floyd, they're done for good. Which kind of sucks. But at least we have what we have. I'm really enjoying David Gilmour's solo album. I'll link to it below. Let me know if you'd like me to cover any of that. I'm going to try to get an interview, but how those things go. What do you guys think? Do you like my 5 Pink Floyd album picks? Impossible task, I'm telling you. But one of my favorite bands, top 3 bands for me. Let me know below what are your 5 Pink Floyd Evolution albums or tracks. Let's have a great discussion. What other artists would you like to see from the series? Leave us a comment about Pink Floyd, about their evolution, and let's have a great discussion. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.